Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Neko Art Show. I'm just gonna call it that for now. It could totally be anything different. Not hard set at all. But anything, huh? Anyway, welcome to the show. And I got another tip for you guys. One interesting thing that I've kind of discovered and have been playing with. So, I've been playing a lot of Tears of the Kingdom, as you can see right in front of you right now, and I've been loving it. But one interesting thing, one thing that I think was exceptionally improved, and one thing that I like to do because it is very doable in an open world format game where you can just kind of screen cap any moment you want to, is kind of using the game for cinematic elements. So what I mean by that is using the game to study cinematic shots and compositions and angles. Some of these are through cutscenes that the game provides, and some of these are just, hey, you know, I'm going through the game, let me see if I can capture this moment in a very cinematic fashion. So let's go ahead and get into it and get into some details about what I'm talking about. So we'll start with the middle one right here because it's very apparent and dynamic. So as you can see, this is the conversation I had with a person in the mountain area, right? So this is Benny. We're having a conversation with Benny. And what I did is I decided not to move forward with the conversation. I decided to play with the camera while talking with Benny to see what would be the most dynamic shot of like talking with Benny. And I settled on this one right here. So we're going to start a new layer. And we're gonna approach it like this, right? We're gonna bust out our grays and our blacks and everything. So this is an interesting angle for Benny and myself because we have all these interesting elements to it here. We have Link right here in the foreground. We have this plant here kind of like coming up and entering even further into the foreground and creating some sort of like a break and interest in the shot. And then we have Benny right here. So you may ask, well, how does this help me understand composition rather than just looking at things that are cool? Well, we're gonna break down this shot into the most simple geometric shapes as we can to understand the absolute core design of this composition and the shape language and why it's making it work. So in order to do this, I was thinking about approaching it one way, like side by side, but instead it might be better to just trace over the damn thing anyway. So we're going to start with the background elements and we're going to work our way down. So the background elements here, we're going to make like a very light gray. We're going to work in them in gray tone values. And we're just going to try we're just gonna paint over here this whole thing, and we're just gonna assume the sky is like this background element right here, right? Just to get it in there. Actually, I want to refer only editing layer. Cool. We're gonna delete that layer now because it takes up too much space. We just want to set a boundary, and then we're gonna come down and make the gray a little darker, not as dark. We're gonna come into this mountain here. Now, the reason why I made this gray light, but not super dark, like pretty close to the background, is because this gray, if we cut on the other background layer, it's not supposed to stand out that much. As a matter of fact, this might even be a little too dark, but we'll leave it because it's supposed to fade. The less contrast there is, the more things fade into the background. So we're going to delete those two. Now we're going to get into some more interesting elements. So we're going to bring it down to about a mid-gray, and we're going to work our way forward. So now we have Benny. And instead of following Benny's shape, what I'm going to do is we're going to get to the most simple geometric shape we can. We're just going to plop in a rectangle for Benny. And we're going to do a little thing for the sword handle, just to add a little bit of interest. But boom, this is Benny. This simple rectangle is Benny. And then we see how Benny plays on the background. It's a pretty simple shape, but now we're starting to see the very core base elements of the composition. And this is kind of like what we're trying to get down to, right? We're not trying to figure out all the intricacies of the characters and study that. We want to study the composition. So by resorting to the most basic shapes and forms, well, not even forms that are in there, just using basic shapes to identify things, you can actually just study what the actual composition is doing, and with complete and utter focus. You're not focusing on like somebody's armor or all these little details that may add to the story of the overall image, but it really isn't the composition itself. So right here we have this simple shape for length, and I just have, boom, a line just cutting through it because this line ended up adding to the composition as well. But more importantly, even without that line, like just the rectangle kind of says enough. So we're gonna leave it there. And I think we can do one more layer between Benny and the other one for like this kind of like semi-background thing. So we're gonna make it like a touch lighter. Well, not the background, but the ground itself. It's a little lighter than Benny, but not quite as light as the other one. We're gonna throw that in there. And then for the last touch, we're gonna make a final layer, complete black, and this is gonna be our absolute foreground. I was thinking of like making Link that kind of black, and you could still do it. But with these plants in here that ended up coming in and doing that, I decided they're going to be the black thing because they're really functioning more of a foreground than Link is. And so we break it down, and now we have this. This is like the core element of the composition, right? And when we look at this, actually I could probably make the Link layer a little darker. I think he should be a little darker. Here, we're going to make him significantly darker. You can probably make Benny a little darker too, so she comes forward a bit. There we go. So what we're seeing here is how the actual composition starts to come together, right? We have a lot of shape language kind of like pointing upwards, this diagonal thing, and there's a lot of activity here, and then you have Link, which is kind of like a straight rectangular object that sort of like breaks it apart. But he's sort of like, with his spear, he's sort of in conjunction with it as well, despite adding a little bit of like intersection with it and an interest. And then you have Benny here, who's against like this very faded, like smooth background. There's not a lot going on. I mean, maybe there's like, you know, Benny's little tint back here that I noticed in the shot. But overall, this side, the left side, is much less active than the right side. But that is like a fundamental aspect of the composition. And what's more, we can like throw in a filter just to emphasize some of the things that were in the original image, because foreground was kind of substantially blurred. Let's not overdo it. But it's blurred, so it's in the foreground, but it's not so defined that you can't like tell what's going on with the actual image, right? And that's kind of the base of it. Let me create a folder for this. Not a layer, a folder. So we can stick it all in there, and boom. And now we can see like the base composition of this, and understanding on like a shape level is very helpful. And I think like when you're planning out your own compositions, you can go in and just start with extremely simple shapes just like this. And that'll probably speed up your thumbnailing a lot, just so you get an idea of how the shot is going. And there, it's like 1-to-1. Pretty good, right? And so now let's move on to like another one. Let's move on to like the one in this, I guess, cinematic shot, right? And this one, I think we're going to kind of focus on the character placement and the important elements that are adding to it. Because otherwise, it's just, I think it's just going to be spending a lot of time going over the same stuff. So here, I'm just going to kind of fill in the idea of like, yeah, this is the ground. This is the ground plane. This is all we really need to know about the ground plane, right? But more important than the ground plane, and we're gonna break the order a bit, is the character placement. So this is a very central composition for this shot here in this scene. And I don't know if you got to this point in the game. I won't explain what's going on, but it was a very cinematic element, so it was important to do it. But you have this character here who's standing here, and this character here, and since they were like right in the center, like the focal points, we're just gonna make their rectangles like straight black, because it's pretty, there's no like foreground element that's proving to be more important than these guys. So by making them straight black, it's clear they are the absolute center focus of the composition. And since Link is even not like the center focus of this composition, we're just gonna make his rectangle like slightly, especially considering he has less contrast, slightly less dark. So boom, this is pretty much the overall, and I think I did this all on the same layer, which works. But this is the overall composition, right? We have this right here, these two. We have Link right here. I think we have, you know, a little bit of a framing action from all the other objects in the shot. So we have the building here, kind of framing Link, which leads into the banner, and this thing kind of framing the others. So everything kind of like pushes in towards the center here. And obviously the center has this like really bright light that's kind of like emanating out. And because the bright light is emanating out, it kind of like brings attention to everyone else, right? And while yes, the top of the sky isn't that bright, I think the concept comes across pretty well. This is overall like your base composition. And so now you can study like, where are these characters in tandem with the rest of the environment? What is their lighting like? If we really pay attention, since they're front lit, they are much darker silhouettes, so the lighting is very similar. And since they're in front of like the light source directly, they pop out more and it focuses on them. And they're in the center of the composition. They're super framed. Even Link is like off to the side and he gets lost in this building here. And the shapes kind of like reflect that, right? And so again, like if you're like planning your shot and you just like want to like plot out something very simple, let me see, like boom, let's just do like a quick example of like a box here. Practical applications. And then you just switch to like a really dark color and you decide, you know, I have two characters center stage kind of talking to each other. And then we have like, you know, buildings that frame them. We have like a little tower or something, blah, 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 blah. And then we have like a really light section here. Boom. And then like, let's say this is like your composition, right? Let me add a little more to these rectangles. But now it's like, oh, now we're getting like a clear idea of the composition. They stand out a lot more because there's all this light here. We can even do like, oh, that's too much. We can even do like a lighter object to form kind of like the background. And we just kind of like cascade things in. But either way, the central concept stays the same, and you can just kind of like build scenes like this. And maybe if you wanted to like change it up even more, you have like this rectangle like standing over, and we could just so it becomes more defined for you, we have like a little head. We can just make a little shoulder or something, and now there's a story. Now it's like two people like focused on, but we have a figure in the foreground who's like looking on them. And if you were to like refine this a little more, maybe you add like a little rim light on him to show, you know, that's overly detailed, but this is like expanding upon like the thumbnail and the general concept of the composition. Show he's looking towards them. So this is why like it's good to study these, you know, study these examples, simply because, I mean, you learn a lot from them. Like breaking it down into its simple concepts helps eliminate a lot of the like overwhelming details in these shots, and it allows you to see the shots for what they are and how they work. Like I like this shot especially because, let's switch to our dark color, because we have the character right here, Zoomy, and we'll stick with this simple rectangle. Zoomy's right here, and we're gonna do like another rectangle for her arm since she's so close to the camera, it's kind of relevant. Zoomy's right here and connecting to like the cart. And even though I drew over it, you see the dog looking back. So the dog brings your attention back to Zoomy. You go up a little shade. We have this cart here. I'll make it a different color because the cart's not the focus, but it's still pretty far in like the foreground, right? I mean, if you wanted, you could literally make it the same color and it would tell a lot of the same story. And boom, this is our foreground. And in our background, we have like, you know, the stable kind of sitting there, and all the elements of the stable are kind of like framing Zoomy herself, right? So the stable is acting like a frame as well because it's completely surrounding. And then you have like a lighter shade for the ground here. Fill that in. We have Doggo. Woof woof. And then, you know, we could go to, we'll keep all this like the same color, and we can like lighten the color for things that get further into the distance. And then even more for like the sky. And now we have the base idea of like what this composition is and why it's so appealing. And this is a very centered composition too, but it allows you like very much to like focus on the subject. And I think, and I would argue, like this is again a sense of asymmetry, right? Because it's centered, I think it ends up working because it's asymmetrical. Because like the one below it, here, do I have that one? You can notice there's a lot more activity on the right than there is on the left. And so because there's that like dissonance in activity, it adds interest for the eye. And it's a lot easier to see that when you don't have all the details thrown in there. Because now you have like the contrast between her white shirt and her red jacket, that's pulling interest. And then there's the glowing light here that pulls interest. There's the color variations in Link's outfit that pulls interest. And there's all these elements. And if we go up here, like there's her skin that pulls interest. There's the doggo, of course, that's going to pull interest. And there's all these other little elements that kind of like come into play, and they sort of cloud the base composition and the skeleton of why this works. I just clicked the layer. I wasn't supposed to yet. But as you can imagine, I have gone through the game and taken tons of screenshots like these with tons of moments, right? And here, I'm gonna like, do I have a layer up here? I'm gonna like make this layer a medium gray, right? And we're just gonna color it. So we can look at the layers with like values, right? And now we start to see like more of the core elements of the composition without all the colors in the way, right? So we have this one right here. This is a great one because it's got like high contrast. So let's go ahead red. Let's go with like bold colors so that we start to see like the elements in like in a different light. So we have like this shape right here in red, which represents like the hot air balloon, right? And so we have like, let's go blue. Blue is like this mountain acting as like the mid-range. The mid-tone. And we'll do green for this slightly further tone, because this is kind of just, this is simply how it's breaking up, right? This is the composition. So this is like the between the mid-ground and the background. And we'll do yellow for like the background, right? We'll fill that in. Boom. And that's the core composition. And then obviously you would, to translate in colors, this would be black. This would be like lighter gray. This would be this. And this would be that. And that's like the baseline of the composition, right? But it works. And this one is not centered. This is kind of like in the lower left corner. But everything, as you can see now, which was easier to see than with all of this, everything is kind of like, let me pull up the red again. Everything is kind of like flowing back into this. They're flowing through this object, through the focal point. The mountain's going through the focal point. The horizon's going through the focal point. And if I cut this away, even some of the clouds back to the focal point, right? So everything is kind of like working in tandem with each other. And there's a lot of great ones with Riju too, but let's see. Let's go to this one, right? So this scene is the last one I want to talk about because I think I pretty much got the concept across, even though there's a lot of great examples of this. Like this is a pretty good composition. This is a great composition, of course. This one, it's got a classic like story behind it. This is a decent one. It's not my favorite. Anyway, let's talk about the one in the cave with Sagessa. So I think we'll go in sequence of the order I kind of shot these in. And this is how you can study it too, because you can even do different angles and different compositions for the same scene and dialogue, right? And it'll leave a different impression. It will tell a different story or give a different tone of the story at each angle you do. So this is the first angle. It's just kind of like bottom up. They're pretty level, right? Link's a little taller, but things are pretty level, right? And you have like this foreground of like shrubbery, which is a nice touch. I think the foreground of the plants kind of like helps has like a bit of a division between the two. So there's just like something is at odds with each other. And you have Link over here and Sagessa over here. And this, obviously there's a conversation. She's got like this shocked, worried tone. So she's kind of like on edge. She's crowded by like the shrubbery and everything. So it seems like she has like a bit of a, she's kind of cornered. And because of this pose, she's always going to appear a bit cornered. But I think this one kind of like really emphasizes it, right? And it's a very bottom heavy composition as well. You can see a lot of the ceiling and the ground plane is like really low. So everybody looks like bigger. It's like you're peeking down and like hunkering down and like peeking into it, right? Versus this composition, same exact dialogue, same pose and everything. But now it seems a little bit different, right? Now this could be turned into like more of an insidious situation. Whereas here, like, you could look at it and be like, oh, Sagessa was caught in the act of doing something wrong. How dare she? But here, notice how there is a light. I still have this thing, right? No. There is a light, a spotlight on Sagessa. So it's like, boom, she's the kind of like the focal point, right? We're looking down. So now it's like, instead of looking up at the situation, we're looking down at it. And we're kind of like observing from above. And now Link is contrasted by being in the darkness versus her being lit up. This could potentially, now we know Link, he's not the bad guy, but this could potentially, like if these were different characters, be interpreted differently, right? If there was, am I auto-saving? I'm auto-saving. Awesome. Always happens. Anyway, so if this were a different character, let's just block out Link so we don't know it's him. And this were a different character. Here, I'll try to preserve some of the pose since it's important. And you know what? Here. We'll do a bit extra, right? Anyway, if this were a different character, now this character can be interpreted like much more insidiously. They're coming out of the darkness, they're looking at this person like who's lit up, and they're like, this person's on edge and they're scared and they're like, oh, what are you talking about? And something's about to happen. And like, I have another shot that very much mirrors this almost one-to-one, and there's reason why like it's interpreted in such a way, right? But I don't want to show that. That's pretty big spoilers. This is just random quest stuff. And then we have this shot down here where she looks a little more mischievous now. She doesn't look as innocent because she's sitting right here. She's still in the light, but if you map out this and you map out Link, he's significantly taller than she is, isn't he? He's much bigger. And because he's much bigger, that impacts the interpretation. He could be interpreted bigger than she is. He found like a small mischievous, well, I don't want to say creature. That's a bit cruel, isn't it? But anyway, somebody's small, right? And he's got like complete control of the situation. You know, his arms are akimbo, and you see the back of him, and you see like the front of her frightened expression and everything. And you know, there's this like casual slackness about it, but that's overly detailed about the composition. Anyway, the fact that he's bigger makes him appear to be more in control. And probably not so negative, right? Not a negative connotation, right? This could always be flip-flopped. Composition, you can always flip-flop the narrative, but generally, because he's bigger, it also subjectively implies like bigger in personality and whatnot. Because we're closer and we're like peering over the shoulder, and he's But these are all like very different tones, very different vibes, right? I feel like if you saw this scene, depending on the angle, like this carries a different narrative. This carries a different narrative and like a different feeling when you look at it. And this carries a very different feeling as well. This actually, I feel like, has the least amount of tension than the other two shots. All the other two shots carry much more tension, right? And I think there's the other element of like, there's not this dividing thing in front of them. So this isn't dividing them. That adds tension. There's not the same amount of distance. That adds tension. They're like significantly closer, right? So because they're just subtly significantly closer in space, it even that kills the tension a little bit, because it's not as like at arms. And I think we have another one here too, right? Yeah, we have another one here. Oh, also another element, them being more eye to eye on eye level also relieves the tension as well, because they're seeing eye to eye, right? They're kind of on the same page. And this completely dissolves the tension as well, because they're much more level. Let me bust out my trusty layer. They're much more eye to eye, much more on a level. I don't think, like, she's kind of smaller, but in proportion, there's not as much exaggeration, so she doesn't look nearly as small, right? Yeah, the size difference is way bigger in the other one. And there's also the element of, like, her pose is significantly different now. It's not as on edge, it's much smaller, it's casual, and his pose is very casual, so the tension is completely diffused and gone, right? But practically the same scene, right? Especially these three, right? Same line of dialogue, as you can see. So that's like the power of just studying different compositions whenever you're playing any video game. This isn't just like a Tears of the Kingdom thing, although I think like the game's great for it. But playing any game, you could do this. You could explore different compositions, explore different characters at different angles. You can explore the cinematics, see the angles that they chose, and all these things kind of factor in how the scene works, how it looks, what decisions were great, what decisions were not. And again, like, I highly recommend the simple shape method. Just breaking down simple shapes of, like, hey, this is like my main subject, this is like my other subject, and then so we have like the ground here, and you just like put in things one by one just to kind of like break them up, right? And we'll just like, boom, add that as like the overall background, because everything else is just pretty much details, right? Just do that and you will find the structure of so many of these compositions and what makes each composition work. Like, if you liked this particular tone, you could just break it down, see what the base structure of that composition is, and then you just repeat it in a different situation. And you could take it a step further and just decide, hey, what if I took down the base level of these compositions, drew new characters in the same situation, and see how it works, see how it felt, see what story came out of it. You could even try, hey, what if I could change the narrative? What if I could change the way this feels? What if I can add something that alters the feeling that this composition invokes? Because in order to do that, you would just have to understand the composition more deeply. Excellent exercise that I highly recommend. And it's been about half an hour. That's all I got for today. Again, this is just something that I noticed while playing the game, and I noticed a lot of the shots were just really cool and really good, and I loved like breaking them out, studying them. Heck, I'll probably even reference a lot of these and do more in-depth studies with them, but I just wanted to stop, take a moment, and just kind of show this as it is, right? Just show them as they are. Like, honestly, this is a great one. I love this one. But in any case, that's all I got. Just wanted to share my findings with you, and hopefully you can use this in the future whenever you're studying or creating a new work or whatever the like would be, right? All right. Thank you for stopping by. Please feel free to like, subscribe, stay tuned for more. And yeah, I'll catch you guys the next time. Deuces.